Hello, I'm Amanda Jane Ogden and I'm going to show you how to make a bowl from paper today, recycled paper. It's a really nice project to do because you're just using things that would be thrown away otherwise to make something beautiful. So you're going to need a few different things. First of all, you need a good stack of used paper. Printer paper works really well for doing papier-mâché. You can use newspaper like this, but actually it doesn't glue as well as this stuff does, so this is what I recommend. You also need to use something to use as your mould. So I've chosen a china bowl like this. It doesn't matter which bowl you choose, but it's got to be wider here than it is at the base, because whatever you use for your mould, you need to be able to get this back out again. So, and you might say, well, I want to make a bowl because I haven't got a bowl that size. Okay, well then you could use something like a rounded object. You could use an orange or a grapefruit. You could cut a small circle of cardboard from the inside of a kitchen roll, tube, something like that. Tape it with masking tape to the bottom of the fruit, and then use that doing papier-mâché up to about halfway up the fruit. Take the fruit out at the later point. That could work fine. I recommend that you use PVA glue. This stuff works really well. Not expensive to buy, so some PVA glue there. I've got a jug with a bit of water in because I'm going to slightly water down the PVA glue. So for that I've got a couple of pots here that I've made from the bottom of a milk bottle. And you need a couple of jam jars. These are very useful indeed for resting your papier-mâché on while it's drying. I'll explain a bit more about that later. You might use a glue spreader like this to put your glue on, but best of all, I have found, is an inexpensive glue brush like this one. You need to look after it really well. Rinse it out very thoroughly at the end of each session so that you still have bristles that work afterwards. So we'll start with preparing the paper, and it's really useful to be able to use a ruler, and if you happen to have a metal ruler like this one, best of all. You can usually tear 2 to 3 sheets at a time. I wouldn't suggest you try more than that. So I'm just going to put my sheets down on the table and tear the paper into strips like that, just pressing on the ruler and pulling the paper back against the ruler. And then you want to subdivide those into pieces, perhaps about the size of a postage stamp, maybe a little bit bigger, and slightly separate them out with your fingers first, because what you don't want is these sheets stuck to each other when you're wanting to glue them separately to your mould. So like with these, I'll just pick them apart slightly with my fingers and then start tearing. I've got a box full here, all ready to use. I'll put this over there. And the mould, I'm going to cover completely with cling film. And this will make it so easy to take the papier-mâché off when we need to. So I'm just going to cover it like that, put the ends in, and then we're ready to go. Okay, so into my pot, I'm going to put some PVA glue. And I'm going to water it down just a little, which is why I put it in the jug, because if I put it under the tap, I tend to let too much go in. So that's my glue, and I'm just going to add a little bit more liquid in the form of the water. Okay, that's all quite thick. I'm just going to put a tiny little bit more in. I recommend that you just put a bit of glue in at a time and add the water, because papier-mâché is something you need to do in stages, and you're better using up this glue and then mixing new again for your next session. I've got a PVC tablecloth on the table and on top of that newspaper, because things are going to get sticky. And if I've got newspaper here, I can actually glue right onto the table. So I'm going to just put glue on the back of my pieces of paper as it's printed on one side. I'm going to try and make sure that the printed side goes down onto the mould, and you can see that I'm actually using my brush to press the paper down once it's on the mould. So it's actually getting a bit of glue on the outside of the layer as well as on the inside, the one that's currently next to the cling film. I'm going to put 3 layers on in this session. It's not worth putting many more than that on at one time, because they just take too long to dry. You're better doing 3 layers and then putting it in a warm place and coming back the next day when it's completely dry. You can tell it's dry because when you tap it, it'll sound like it's a stiff, hard surface. So you can see that I'm slightly overlapping these shapes, and I want to cover the whole bowl. Now the difficult thing is when you put the second layer on is to keep track of where you've been, because if it's all white, how can you tell whether it's the first or second layer? So if you're doing it all in white, you just have to be quite careful that you turn it round as you go, so you don't get it much thicker on one side than the other. So I'm using printer paper. You could make your papier-mâché bowl with tissue paper. It gives a really beautiful, fine, almost translucent bowl at the end. It won't be as sturdy, but you can get some really lovely effects by using just tissue paper. And you could, of course, use brown paper or a sort of grey unbleached packing paper, and you'd get a different kind of object at the end. So once you've got the basic technique, you could really experiment with quite a few different kinds of paper. I like that this is all paper that would have been thrown out. Now I'm going right down to the edge here, and so I'm tending to use the pieces that have a very straight edge to go in there. I've got one gap at the back here. And I'm just going to smooth that whole layer with my paste brush. So that's the first layer done of 3 layers. You need to do 2 more exactly the same, making sure that the whole of the area is covered. One trick you could try is resting it on a paper plate or an old plate and just turning it round as you add the new layer on. And when you've got 3 layers, stop. It's time to let it dry out until the following session, usually a good 24 hours. Now, if you put this down on the paper like this, the glue will glue the bowl shape to the newspaper, and when you lift it up, you'll end up with lots of little scraps of newspaper, which isn't great. So this is the moment to use the jam jar, pick it up, and just rest it over the top like that, and put it to one side and dry it out like that. So once your first 3 layers is completely dry, and when you tap your completed 3 layers, it sounds like you're tapping something hard, then you start right over again and you add 3 more layers. It's really important that the first 3 layers dry before you put on the next 3. I've got one here that I did a bit earlier. This here has got 6 layers on now. and that's really quite firm. I'm going to show you how to release it from the mould. This is where the cling film comes in. So I'm just going to lift the cling film up so it's not sticking to the inside of the bowl anymore. And then I'm going to use a blunt knife just to go around the edge and release the papier-mâché from the bowl. Just go gently with this because you don't want the knife to go down and split some of your hard-won 6 layers. Feels like it's freeing up all the way around now. Okay, so that's just going to slip out. That is not one I did earlier, that was done live. Okay, so that is how it should come out. And the cling film has done its job in stopping any of the paper to stick to the bowl. So that's worked really fine. Okay, so here I've got my bowl with 6 layers. And now you're going to add some more layers. I would suggest that you do at least 3 more on the outside, and you might want to do a couple on the inside as well. And at the very end, I would suggest that you do a layer of pieces of paper just going over the edge like that. So you neaten off that edge. That's actually quite sharp because that's got cut edges and it's got the glue on them, so that's quite stiff. So that's your next stage. At least 3 more layers, probably 2 or 3 on the outside and perhaps 1 on the inside, and then just 1 round over the edge. So here I've got a bowl with 3 more layers than the last one I showed you. So that's the one with 6, and this is the one with quite a lot thicker and sturdier. You can also see how I've put a layer around the edge of paper just going over the top to just smooth that top edge. So now you need to think about how you're going to decorate this bowl. One of your options is to use paper as collage to cover it and to line it. So you could choose really beautiful strips of colour that you cut from magazines, say. You could cut interesting printed pages from an old book that you find in a second-hand shop, something like that. You could really make it interesting lots of different ways. If you have ended up with your outside layer being completely white, no print showing through at all, you could actually use a layer of tissue paper. I'm actually going to use acrylic paint that will make the bowl a bit more long-lasting. You need to do that in 2 stages because you will need to do one part and let it dry. So I'm going to start with the outside, and I'm going to put red acrylic paint on the outside of my bowl. And a bit like doing the papier-mâché, 2 thin layers is better than 1 thick layer with drips. So we'll see how well it covers just with 1 layer. And if I need another layer, I will paint another layer. And I'm using a small decorator's brush, just because that puts the paint on quite nicely. So I'm just going to stop at the edge. Just go to the very last bit, and then I'm going to touch one of my jam jars like I used before. Set the bowl on top and just finish the last little bit. Check that I've covered all the areas. I'm going to let that dry and then we'll paint the inside. So here's a bowl that's all finished with the painting. I put a second layer of red on the outside, let that dry. I put a layer of gold on the inside, let it dry, and a second layer. And then finally, I've put a glaze on the outside, just using PVA glue and water. Slightly thicker than you used for doing the papier-mâché. About the thickness of single cream is about right. Don't put it on too thick, that just gives it a slight luster. Of course, before you put the final layer of glaze on, you can decorate the outside or the inside. You could put collaged papers on, you could paint on it, all sorts of possibilities. So I think the moment has come to fill this bowl with some sweets, and that could just make a really nice present for somebody, or you might put your bowl on the desk with paper clips in, or whatever you choose. And you can make a bowl any size, provided you use a mould where the open side is wider than the base. So I hope you have a lot of fun using papier-mâché. That's all for now. Bye.